So when we're talking about scaling, hiring's a big part of scaling.
Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about what it means to, okay, you've got the business going. Now we're starting to scale, and maybe you're starting to look at, putting processes in place, making new hires. And so we're going to cover a lot of different things today. Really excited.
Scaling isn't more sales.
Once you understand what you're doing, now how do I document how I do it and what are efficient ways to be able to do that?
But if you're really thinking about that you're going to be in the next stage or you're going to continue to grow, all this is really important, because if not, you might be finding yourself working 100 hours a week in your business and starting to hate it.
If you are a business leader that is, struggling to kind of get through this stage, this podcast is for you, and we're going to hop on in. Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Next Gen Strategies podcast. As always, my name's Grant Covault. Joining me today is Tyler Davis.
Hello.
We have a really cool episode coming up today. We touched on in previous episode a little bit about scaling and what that means for different levels of businesses. And so in our previous episode, we talked more specifically to what it's like to be a solopreneur and kind of get the business off the ground and just start by yourself. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about what it means to, okay, you've got the business going. Now we're starting to scale, and maybe you're starting to look at putting processes in place, making new hires. And so we're going to cover a lot of different things today. Really excited. So Tyler, why don't you talk a little bit about kind of what that initial scaling starts to look like?
Yeah, I think that this episode's going to be probably a bigger piece, because you're in between basically just starting to hire and also having several hires or thinking about what the next position is. So when we're talking about scaling, hiring's a big part of scaling. Some of that depends on what you do, what your business is, but typically that is the biggest one, because that's when you're going to start seeing things hit your margins because you're hiring someone. So what we wanted to talk about is, to start, the signs, of needing to hire. And, some of those signs, I think, are what's going to drive maybe what roles you want to hire, and how things are getting set up. So, when you start thinking about this, I think there's a couple different areas that kind of show you it might be time to hire. You're getting really busy.
Mm-hmm.
And are you starting to have to turn away work or turn away opportunities that you want to go after because you don't have the time to do them, or there's just a lack of capacity overall in your business, whether you're making widgets or you're doing marketing, right?
Yep.
So I think that's where I'm going to say that the signs start showing you what you need to hire, because there's a pretty big difference between, well, I'm getting bogged down in emails with my customers and estimates or purchasing materials, versus if you're getting bogged down because you just need more help in either the product that you make or the service that you sell, and you need actually more revenue generating people, right? So what that would look like for like a service-based industry is someone else that does that service. But then on the other side of the coin, if we're talking about you just getting bogged down in emails, that might just be a receptionist, So those are two different things, and that's kind of drive the conversation forward.
Yeah. I think it's really important to as you're considering, because there's all kinds of businesses out there, like you just said, like whether you're a service-based business or you're producing a widget, it's really important to understand what that internal internal stuff is versus exactly what you just said, the actual stuff that creates and is generating revenue. So absolutely.
Yeah. So when I think about roles, it seems like a lot of times the first role in the hiring is that admin support, because if you are able to get back 10 hours, 20 hours a week of stuff that is keeping you from either creating the product that you sell or delivering the service that you give, you're finding these areas where this admin can come in and save you time that then you can go put back into your business and generate more revenue. I think that's something to understand. And I think we'll get into this a little bit later about, scaling. My old definition from the episode before is protecting margins, right? So that's going to be an important part of this. But that's an area that I think we need to talk about in terms of, do you hire someone in the old-fashioned way, right? And you post a listing full-time, this and that. Do you need to do that? Because I think we talked in the last episode a little bit about how the economy now is set up like this gig economy, right? You can go online and find people that are talented in so many different ways, and you can hire them in a contract type role, which I'm sure you might be familiar with, where you've got one yourself, or you've heard about it, is just doing a 1099 contract with someone who's in the business of doing this themselves. Like, for instance, if we're going to talk about receptionists or office admin, these virtual reception, virtual assistants, like these things exist out there. And you get to scale with them, because you may only need 5 hours a week. Well, you can do that rather than trying to figure out, I need enough work for 40 hours a week for someone.
Right. And all the other things that come with hiring somebody, like overhead and benefits and the headache going through and the search process and all the things like that.
Yeah. So I think the part that gets hard is, have you been doing the things like we were talking about? Every time you're in one of these stages, you need to be prepared for the next one. So if you, for lack of a better word, if you're kind of a hot mess, right, and you have no processes and no procedures and you go on the fly, it can be really hard for maybe a virtual assistant to come in and plug in and help you. But if you've started, processizing the way you do your business, that's something you can hand off to either, if it's a company that does it, or this other individual. And these are these repeatable tasks that are easy to do. Like, for instance, this is how we price services. This is how we give estimates. This is how we always ask for a review. Something like that you can always do, and it's repeatable, that you can give, and you can calculate how much time that's going to give you. That's, I think, a real easy place to start.
Yeah, I agree. I think naturally you're going to have to probably hire at some point in time.
Right.
But I think you have to really have that core understanding of, what do I have some processes in place? Am I being roughly as efficient as I can? Like you said,
right.
Sometimes, it might just be a little bit of a hot mess, but
right.
just to be able to kind of understand, like, well, if I was to just look at a week or over a span of 2 weeks, how much time am I spending on certain things versus others, and really just try to be cognitive of that, then I think that, that's going to open you up to be able to be successful in bringing that person on. Because you got to think ahead, like you said, that next step of, okay, now how am I going to get this person to do what I need them to do?
Yeah. So. And then the other side of the coin, right, is if I've already hired an office administrator, or your wife does it for you as part of the business, or somewhere along that lines where you're like, I actually just need more hours for the product or service I deliver. That's a whole nother process to think about too, because it's now not you doing said service or making said product.
Right.
And you're going to have to think about what that role looks like. And then you're going to have to think about what that role looks like and what it does to your margins. And I think if you do your legwork here on the first one, that's going to give you a lot of benefits, because you can kind of refine it and make it better and keep using it. And that's what we're talking about when we talk scaling, is finding systems that work that you can keep using. Because if you're an electrician, you just might need another electrician. Well, how do I get them on, and how do I get them to do the work the way I do it? If you're making widgets, well, how do I get this person in here
and maintain quality?
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's kind of why I'm coming back to the signs kind of move along for you. And then you just have the successes and challenges of once you have these employees. And I think that's probably the next area we're going to go into about those challenges, because you've probably never had employees, or we don't have to call them employees, right? You might have some contractors. I mean, there are businesses that build out teams of contractors depending on what your business is as well. So I don't know if you have anything to add about kind of when you get this person, you probably already have a good idea about the items that you want to give them. But delegation is not the easiest thing to do in the world, especially if you are really proud of your business and you're a bit of a perfectionist.
Yeah, no, that's a really good spot for me to hit, because I can oftentimes be that perfectionist. And I know you on your side of the coin can as well. So I would just say, be really realistic with yourself of what you're good at and what you actually enjoy doing. For example, I'll just say from a marketing standpoint, like, I know that I can do the accounting, I can do the books and stuff, but is that really what my best core competency is and what I want to be doing every day? Like, no, not at all. So, to be able to have somebody else to be able to do that, like, that's important for me, because then I can spend more time doing what I'm really good at, which is, strategy and marketing and the other things, the really nitty gritty pieces of it. But so really figuring out what you're good at, what you're not good at, what you enjoy doing, what you necessarily don't enjoy doing. And then, like we said, being able to identify, like, what activity are you doing that's actually generating revenue for your business, and what pieces of it are something that you are comfortable handing off to somebody else, and what pieces are still, and you're in a spot where it's unique and it's like, well, no, I have to still do that, because I'm just not ready to hand that off or be able to make sure that the quality is going to be there with whatever I'm doing.
Well, you might have something on this too, because what I've wondered a lot about this stage. And I think maybe we've talked about it before, but when it comes to delegation, are you going to, at this stage, depending on who you hire, start delegating some of your sales, like in terms of business development? Or does it make more sense to find these other areas? Because it seems like at this stage of a business, like your name or your brand name, like your reputation is a big part, and that's probably a lot of your reoccurring business. And I've had conversations with business owners before where we're talking about a hire. And does it make more sense for you to hire someone to do all the little things that are eating up all your time versus, there are a lot of services out there that'll do like sales for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, no. Oh gosh. Yeah, that really depends on the business that you're in. I think a lot of times where I see and folks that I'm working with, we're like, their automatic thing is like, okay, how do I get to more sales? How do I get to more sales? How do I get to more sales? And a lot of times they'll start looking at, these folks, I'm sure if I get some on LinkedIn or you get the email from you, we'll generate X amount of leads for you in a certain amount of time. Or, gosh, we should, hire on a marketing person or an agency or a full-time business development person so that they can go out and they can prospect and do all these things. And while sometimes that might make sense for businesses, depending on where they're at, a lot of the times, if you don't have that foundation set up to where, you can more adequately sell or do marketing that's going to generate you leads, like the other effort could really put you behind the 8 ball in terms of actually getting business, because it just takes time. And so, going back to what you're saying is, as if you're that owner or you're that owner and you're a person who's starting to hire on more people, like a lot of the times you're still the face of the company. And so nobody can necessarily talk about your company, especially if you're a newer company, nobody can necessarily talk about the different things and the value that you bring and why you're different to the customers as much as you can, because it's in your head, it's in your heart, it's what you were the person to do. And so a lot of times when I'm advising folks that are kind of at that stage, it's like, okay, so from a marketing standpoint, right? Like what are just the bare minimum things that you need to do so you have that foundation to jump off of? And so, one of the first things I always say is, well, if you've got some type of website, like it doesn't have to be this crazy custom website. If you have some type of presence online and you have that plus maybe a LinkedIn and a Facebook channel, depending on what it is, and you've got those things established for your business. I mean, honestly, those are some things that you can do pretty quickly. It doesn't have to be perfect, but think about in the head the head of your customers. If you're hearing about somebody, whether it be through word of mouth or through search, like you're going to go find them online. So to be able to go online, they at least need to know high level who you are, what you do, why you do it. Right. And so if you can establish those in a couple different channels, I think really from there, you don't necessarily have to start doing this paid advertising to find the new. Double down on who your network is. I think so often people forget that their best sales are going to come from existing relationships. And so just being able to think about, okay, so if I'm making widgets, who already buys my widgets? Can I talk to that person? Can I talk to that customer more to get, like you said before, to get a review, to get a referral, to say, hey, I think that you really like, or I hope they like you, you're really enjoying service, really enjoying the product. Well, okay. I also know, looks like you're in X industry. Like, is there anybody else you think could benefit from what we're doing? So have those conversations, and you're going to get, I can almost guarantee you're going to get to more higher quality leads faster than if you spend a bunch of money on, like I said, paid advertising or a third party to go do something. So I would always say exhaust those resources first, work really hard to say, like, who's in my network? How can I get involved? Kind of that boots on the ground, organic standpoint. Especially if you are the owner and you're the one doing the marketing sales, let that kind of be your go-to. And then from there, you can start to scale up in terms of like, okay, so now we can start adding in things. And I know on our next episode, we'll talk much more about, when you're a mature business and doing those things. But I think that really just make sure you're maximizing everything you can from your current customers, your current network of people, and then organically grow after that.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think it's probably going to get reiterated in the next episode, but scaling isn't more sales.
That's right.
Right.
Yep.
When we're talking about scaling, we're talking about, protecting the integrity of your business while you grow and in the margins, and I think this leads to a perfect point in this conversation is that maybe when you start hiring or you're adding a small team, that team's not built to necessarily generate more revenue. Now, clearly it's going to, and you want it to, but the reason I say that is like the accountant in me, right? I don't want you just to go chase more sales if you don't even have the system in which you're going to be able to deliver the service or create the product at the margins and at the capacity levels that you currently have. So when I think about these first hires, whether it's admin, whether it's in the actual product or service, I'm wanting to like take a 10 mile out look at it, right? And say, okay, if we did this times 5, is that okay? That nets down to a 15% margin. That's great. That's what I want, because you got to do that exercise, because if it spits out a number that you don't like, why are we doing it?
Exactly. And I think to that exact point, even as a marketer and a salesperson who's like, yeah, let's go, let's get it going. I always caution folks I talk to, like, you have to talk to a professional like yourself, or just have that skill set internally to be able to make sure. I'm like, you have to have those processes and stuff in place, because if I start going out and making customer promises or promises to potential prospects and you can't deliver on that, that's going to hurt you so much. Or you don't have retention because you've got a leaky funnel. The sales came in and now you've got customers that keep, not coming back to you because you weren't able to deliver the quality. Right. I'm like, that's going to hurt your reputation marketing much more than anything. So I know it's backwards for the marketing guys. So go talk accounting first, but make sure you got those processes in place.
We're talking about the challenges now, right? Because we're talking about the mistakes that we see. Yeah, is that my first hire was sales development, or so it's almost out of order, right? Because if it works great, are you going to be chasing your own tail, fulfilling on it? Or make a mistake and start to build up a customer base that's not the customer base that you need or want.
Yeah. So one of the things to kind of talk a little bit more about in terms of, we get more to that fulfillment side of the equation, or being able to really make sure, like, you're doing the marketing stuff, you've got the internal processes, you maybe got your hires thing, is like, how do we really start to think about streamlining operations? And how do we start to think about, okay, so what are some of those things to really nail on in terms of processes and stuff? And there's a lot of different ways to do that, right? A lot of different tools, a lot of different tips, tricks. But there's some pretty simplistic things to just think about. And I'll talk just specifically a little bit to just kind of, let's just say time, right? I think it's important to understand the value of your time versus somebody else's time, things that you can do that you can do versus what somebody else can do. So if you're kind of at that point where you're like, okay, so I need to start really taking into account from an operations standpoint what I do every day. There's some pretty simple, you go find a million of them online. It might be good to just start time tracking a little bit. There's free ones out there. Heck, I don't care if you use your iPhone and you hit the stopwatch on it. But start, from a day-to-day standpoint, really start to be cognitive of how much time am I spending in a day? Am I spending the amount of time that I want to or need to for the situation that I'm doing? And then figure out, what am I doing those things? Again, between how much time do I spend doing admin work, such as billing, developing contracts, emails, things like that, versus the actual fulfillment side, which is like the actual service or product standpoint. Keep track of those things, figure out how much time you're doing on that. And then when it comes to that, then you can also start to think about, okay, so how do I now document these things? And I don't know if you've got some ideas on time, like SOPs and stuff, but I think that once you understand what you're doing, now how do I document how I do it, and what are efficient ways to be able to do that?
I think we touched on the last episode a little bit, but there are some real specific tools that I leverage a lot. And one of them is, if you're on a computer a lot, right? One of those is Loom. Loom is a product that's, I think has a free option. And then you can pay like $10 or $15 a month for it. But you can screen record your screen and all of your audio, and you can literally make step-by-step instructions on anything you're doing on a computer. So the things that I've leveraged with that is, here's how I do a specific workflow. And now I saved it. Now I have it. And it's the beginnings of a almost like employee training manual to a certain extent. It's like, that's something deeper when you're a lot larger, but now you have a resource bank. I've actually heard of teams who leverage this, where like the actual different contractors or employees they build it into their company culture that, like, hey, I want you to find something new that you learned and document it and put it out on our shared drive so that the rest of us have access to it. Like, that could be huge. I mean, you're going to start finding all kinds of efficiencies. Then on the other end, if you're out, on a manufacturing floor or out in homes doing work, use your phone. You could literally record what you're doing and use that in the future to help train the next person. And we've seen them before as well. this is getting really big in the manufacturing setting where these videos with the way AI is being able to interface with them is like the new version of a training manual that you'd look at. You just watch the video and it's showing different processes and procedures. So starting to get into that mindset is great. And it's so easy because you're already doing these things anyhow. And it's then when you're hiring folks, you're not taking the time to sit there with them. You can give them that either in the introduction and follow up with them after they've learned about it. I think that's a huge tool that could be leveraged.
Yeah. And I think to the other standpoint of that too is, regardless of how many videos or whatnot, like you're going to have to spend time with that person, showing them in person what to do. But what happens is, especially if you've got a new hire, like they're going to be so overwhelmed with all the things that they're learning about you and your company and your customers. Like they're not going to remember everything that first couple of weeks. And so rather than, to your point, of having to go back and re-explain it or back in the day of you're literally just creating long notebooks and checklists of stuff that, who knows if that's going to get lost or updated or whatnot, that these can kind of live out there as resource checks. And it's just going to be so much more helpful, and it's going to save your time. You can explain something once or twice. They can have that resource, and the other side of that too is there's a culture side to that. How you explain things, the fact that you're even showing that you're innovative enough to think to do that is going to be a good sign for your recruitment as well. Because not to go, we could go a whole thing on recruitment, but to be able to at least demonstrate that you have the support resources in place for people as you're, looking to interview them or hire them. Like you could say, hey, like, yeah, then this is how we're going to do it. It helps, if they're trying to decide between you and somewhere else and they feel that comfortability that we're like, oh yeah, this guy's got his crap together.
Right.
It's going to be an important tool from a culture building standpoint as well.
That makes a lot of sense. I think this comes back to too, at this stage, what type of business are you trying to build? If you think, I'm going to have 5 employees and a couple contractors, and I'm going to be hands-on, high touch all the time, and that's the type of business owner I'm going to be, some of the stuff may not be as important. I would probably argue that you should do it anyhow, because you really never know where you want to be in that business, or you never know when someone's going to come to you and say, I would love to buy your business, something like that. But if you're really thinking about that you're going to be in the next stage, or you're going to continue to grow, all this is really important, because if not, you might be finding yourself working 100 hours a week in your business and starting to hate it. Because if you're talking to that business owner that says, I'm here for it now, but I want to get to the point where I'm working on the business, or I'm a representation of the business, you have to start nailing what are the roles for every position. And a lot of that ties into where I might go on a tangent here is the part of scaling and protecting margins, because this is all great and we can talk about it forever, but I like it all to flow into a financial model.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Of course you do. It's like you're a CPA or something.
Yeah.
I don't
know. But that goes all the way back to the beginning when we're talking about signs to hire and everything like that. When I start thinking about, okay, we need to add some sort of administrative support, now you have to start thinking that needs to be in your pricing. Because before it's just you and you're like, I just want to make what I want to make and be happy
support
about
me
it.
Yeah,
whatever me and my family needs. But now you're hiring people and you got payroll to make, and you got to be thinking about your next sale, your next source of revenue needs to have enough margin in it that it supports what you're adding to your business. So, then you have to start thinking about, okay, right now I need to hire this administrative assistant in some capacity. At what point, again, do I think I'd have to hire another version of that to support the business? Okay, so I'm just building out terms like what I'll talk about is like, what is your overhead cost, right? What goes into your costs that are not a direct result of your sales? Because you need to know that to help set your pricing, so you're actually profitable. Then that same conversation is being had again then if you're actually increasing costs or hiring people in your actual area that you're generating revenue, because that goes into your pricing as well. If you are the, contractor who is going out and expanding and wanting to get a lot more clients, you're gonna have to think about, okay, now I have to pay this person to be there for this amount. And I know I have this much support coming in from admin. Okay, what does that do? And how much do I need left on my bottom line to continue growing and all that stuff? So that's where I really like, and this is not something you need an accounting degree necessarily to do, but you can just sit there and just start thinking through, okay, if my business looked like this tomorrow, how much money would I be spending and how much money do you think I'd be making? And am I happy with those end results? And then it's just protecting that on the way up and thinking about it and using it pretty much every step of the way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's, for some folks that's might be an easier step to start to think about like overhead costs and pricing stuff. For others, like maybe it's not necessary. So, maybe quickly touch on like, is that something like, like go consult your CPA or go like, I know some folks might think like, oh my gosh, like that sounds like pretty scary, or how where do I even start? And
yeah, and I'm using big words. I don't have to use overhead, but at the end of the day, you just have costs and you need to figure out how much left over you're going to have in profit. But, there aren't I wouldn't say there are necessarily a ton of CPAs in the space, because you'll see some things with accountants, right? You'll see folks that just do taxes, or you'll see just bookkeepers. Then you'll see some people like me who are trying to do kind of a holistic product together. But I would actually say most of the time, if you're really wanting this nitty gritty, I was going to say it earlier, but you have to actually start getting your accounting together. You need good numbers at some reasonable interval so you can make decisions based on that. So if you're at this point not even having your books done every quarter, I'm going to tell you need to get at least that done and then start seeing this stuff monthly. But a lot of bookkeepers are good at this. There are bookkeepers out there who they're living in your data all the time. And don't be afraid to ask them, because they'll probably have something that they could add onto your package if you're paying for bookkeeping. That does some sort of analysis, and you can start looking at what's going on with my costs. The things I'm going to tell you to start doing is the big one's just cash flow forecasting. And what that is to people here is we just got to, you've probably, if you're a business owner, you're probably thinking, well, my profit and loss said I had this, but my bank account says I have this. Well, that just happens sometimes. So that's what looking at cash flow is you're just looking at how much money's coming in and out of the bank. And I would be doing that on a regular basis, projecting what's going to happen to your cash in the next couple months. And then I'd also be looking at the components of your business and seeing if they're making money when you, not only when you're looking at what it costs you to, the labor for that product or service, but the other things that you have for costs, whether it's if you have an admin assistant or something like that, what they cost, your rent or electricity or all kinds of different little things add up, software. I think the place that I would look for first is if you already have a good bookkeeper, they probably know some things and they would be glad to tell you, honestly.
Yeah. And I think to wrap things up too, I mean, it's just, there's so many things in this phase, depending on your business, that, you might want to consider, or, certain things where you're going to be better at, potentially maybe you've got better books, but you're not necessarily just nailing it on documenting processes,
right.
or maybe you're the other way around and, you're really good from a process standpoint, but maybe you're not great with the books, or maybe you're not financially looking at things, or maybe you're like, hey, oh my gosh, like, okay, I've got these things down, but I don't have the brain for marketing. So like, it's really being able to first kind of self-identify, like, what are the things I need help with? If you're starting to hire on those employees, what are the things I need to know to, find the right triggers and put the right things in process to know whether it's time to hire, whether I need to be looking at more from a process, a tool standpoint. And then just being able to understand, like, okay, what are those challenges that are going to be coming? What are the things that, I need to either stop doing or start doing that will allow me to get to that next step that you've been talking about. And then ultimately making sure that it is profitable, and that, if you of course, that's always take a little bit of risk with business, but like making sure that you do have that profitability built in. And again, whether that's, you being able to be really good with the books, or being able to consult a bookkeeper, or bring in, a CPA who's, specializing in these types of things. It's just really, really important.
Yeah. Well, I can put a plug in for profitability. I don't know if you've read it before or not, but there's a series of books it's called Profit First. It's like a philosophy. And whether you do that or not, that is a great book to read, because the premise of the book is how when you're running this business and you're thinking about everything, you should be putting profit first. So like historically, like us accountants, we put profit at the bottom of the financial statements. It's just what happens. And this idea, and I think it's just good fundamentally for businesses starting with profit. This is how much profit I want to make, and then reverse engineering behind that, because it's just a really good exercise to protect the integrity of making money, because we can get so lost up into growing. I have a $2 million business. Well, if it doesn't make any money, what's the point of your $2 million?
Right.
So
exactly.
That is a great book to pick up and read. And it doesn't, go crazy into like accounting jargon. And there actually are accountants out there that like follow the philosophy. I think it's fantastic.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, everybody, once again for joining us today on the Next Gen Strategies podcast. I hope you found some nice tips and tricks in what we've discussed today. And as always, like and subscribe, follow us on your favorite podcast platform, whether it be Apple, Spotify. Give us a listen in the car, watch videos, whatever you want to do. And until next time, see you later.
See ya.
Thanks again for joining us today on the Next Gen Strategies podcast.
Be sure to follow the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
And if you really enjoyed it, give us a share on any of your favorite social media channels.
And don't forget to leave us a review.